I'd like to show you today how I worked on a painting of John Bunyan. Again, this was an illustration for a book cover that I was commissioned to do. And I'm starting off with a very opaque layer, so a little bit different than what I usually do, going more opaque because this had a tight deadline, and sometimes you just don't have the time to do dozens and dozens of layers with the glazing technique. So I was trying to mix a layer that would be more opaque, and this has a lot of raw umber dark, a bit of titanium white, and a little bit of ivory black, I believe, as well. And I'm just basically going over the background and developing a chiaroscuro or notan, um, blocking in the color of the background, the value of the background very quickly. Now, I modeled for this painting myself, and so the reference image you see in the upper left corner was a photo of yours truly that I took down in the lower area of the barn that's on my property and just set everything up. And you can see the YouTube video here on this channel on how I did the photography if you're interested in that. But I got a really nice shot with some high contrast and used Photoshop to move the window to the upper left corner, so I could have it look more like the cellar or a dungeon or prison like you'd have back in the 1700s, or I should say 17th century, 1600s. And John Bunyan was a preacher and a writer from that time who wrote the famous book Pilgrim's Progress. But here you can see I'm again blocking in this thick layer of raw umber dark, titanium white, a little bit of ivory black, and just trying to cut around the form of John Bunyan, and again develop a very high contrasted foundation here that I can work out of. And using some diagonal strokes going perpendicular to the lines on the hair and other areas to develop a smooth layer. And now I'm blocking around the table and the edge of the table. And so the goal is to really cover the area as smoothly as possible. It's going to take more than one layer, but this will be a really good underpainting for the rest to follow upon. And now I'm blocking in just a few little shadows, on his clothing, and then blocking in the area below the table. And that's has even a higher level of contrast, deeper values because it's in shadow. And I'm just using brush strokes back and forth initially with a lot of pressure, keeping the brush perpendicular to the canvas, and then smoothing over as best as I'm able to do. Now I'm putting a glaze on top of the table, and this is that same color, just a little bit more translucent. So I added a bit of matte medium to it to thin it out. And the initial layer, by the way, did have a little matte medium just to make it flow better. I'm covering over everything here, and basically just want to smooth out this edge, get a nice sharp distinction between the highlighted area of the table and the area in shadow. And I'm using the chisel edge of the brush to get that very sharp definition. Now I'm going to go on the opposite side using a little darker version. So this is a darker version, more opaque version of that same color. And now I am going to be cutting into the clothing, John Bunyan, the shadows, and you can see in the reference photo some of the folds there in the fabric, and that's things that I want to really highlight and bring that texture out as much as possible. And I'm using a very small brush for that, just a very narrow round brush, and keeping the paint very fluid. That's important. So I'm cutting in on some of these folds going across the forearm, and then developing that shadow coming from the forearm being cast onto the table itself. And so that's important to get that distinction. Now I don't want to overdo the details, but just put enough in there so that I'm really getting the major shapes that I can see within the reference photo. It doesn't have to be perfect, but there are certain wrinkles that you expect when somebody has their arm in a bent position, and that's what I'm trying to capture. And now I'm adding some wrinkles here on the other side, and after that a little more definition on the table as well. At this point I want to make sure I get the correct form of those wrinkles on the clothing and have that curvature of the arm described. And now it's time to go in and add the shading on the face. So as you can see in the reference photo from the pose I did, the left side of the face is really highlighted and the right side is an extreme shadow, basically just one light source coming from the window. And so I really want to emphasize that strong lighting. And I'm using the same exact color for the background as I am for the face. You see, skin tones aren't important at this stage. Getting different colors for skin tones, it's all very much the same, especially when you have a dark shadow like this and a chiaroscuro effect. So we want to use the darkest color we can and not try to get fancy with mixing flesh tones or anything like that. Rather, what we want to see is the form and really emphasize the contours of the face. We have the cheek and the nose and the temple and all those areas. Now you can notice I changed it. John Bunyan obviously looked different than me, so I gave him a little longer hair, a mustache, and he had a little soul patch or beard thing under his lip. He didn't have a big bushy beard, so I changed it from how I look and trying to make it look more like him. And I'm trying to emphasize now the edges on the left-hand side between what's highlighted and what's in shadow. So that's very important to get that distinction. And then a little bit of a shadow for the area under his collar. Now you can see I changed it a bit from what I had in the reference photo. I'm just trying to make it a little more precise and what you would expect according to that era and time. And now I'm adding a shadow just to the right of his hands and his knuckle area, because that's an extreme shadow as well. A shadow under the book that he's resting his hand in front of. You can imagine maybe that's a Bible that he's referencing as he's writing Pilgrim's Progress. And this is a lighter version of the background. I added a little bit of titanium white to it just to lighten it up. And that way it'll have more of a look of pages. Even though the pages are white, when they're in shadow, the value is a very dark gray. So we always want to think of value rather than just color. But thank you so much for watching this video. And if you like this, you can subscribe to more videos like this. And go to realisticacrylic.com where I have several tutorials covering all kinds of topics in acrylic portrait painting. So thank you so much for watching this. I'll be coming out with another video on this, so stay tuned for that, showing the next steps on this painting. God bless you in your portrait painting. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk to you soon.